All right, tons of stuff to cover, folks. Welcome to the daily space weather video. Looking at the sun on 171 angstroms, we see a coronal mass ejection. Although we don't see it in this view, we're going to show you in a minute. There's a lot of stuff to cover. Let's start out with some views of the sun here. We got this bright spot, which is quite far south of the equator there. That is cycle 25 activity based on the magnetic polarity of that area. And there's so much stuff to cover. We're making at least 2 videos today, folks. So let's continue on here. Here's the 304 angstrom view. We see this giant plasma filament down here in the southeast. Let's zoom in on that. There you have that, complete with date stamps. That's about 4 Earths in diameter or something like that. Let's look at some more data. But first we're going to look at stereo A, as a coronal mass ejection has just popped off. Right at the very end of the video, you can see it right there. Let me rock that for you. Clearly a coronal mass ejection there. No X-ray flares associated with this. This has kicked off just a couple of hours ago. So nothing yet on the LASCO C2. And yeah, that could be Earth facing, folks. Something to keep an eye on throughout the day. And when I say ion, the pun is intentional. All right, so let's look at the LASCO C3 here. We don't see any kind of a halo or anything yet on there. So I just don't think we have enough data yet on this one. Again, something to keep an eye on throughout the day. We see this little activity rising down here. This could turn into a sunspot. And regardless of whether or not it turns into a sunspot, that is cycle 25 behavior, folks. It's quite far from the equator there. And yeah, so there's the GOES X-ray imager. We're also going to look at the Enlil spiral here, as it looks like the Enlil spiral picked it up, that coronal mass ejection. And there's the Enlil spiral. This is a pretty small coronal mass ejection from the way it looks, but it looks like this caught it. Check it out. Early today, right there, you can see in the bottom frame the radial velocity. You can see that coronal mass ejection coming out. Keep in mind that is a forecast and a model. Let's move on to more stuff, a lot more stuff. 10.7 centimeter radial flux back to 67, still below the orange line that we've drawn in there, which we've drawn in at 70 solar flux units to kind of illustrate solar minimum. Let's talk about funding the page, the channel, etc. Please do it on Patreon, as YouTube pays us precisely zilch for these videos. You can also donate on PayPal. Or if you're in the market for CBDs, check out the Hemp Lucid Spaced Out campaign, specifically formulated for our spaced out viewers. Thanks everybody who's been clicking on the links. And please improve your life with CBDs. Perhaps get off of prescription meds. Don't take that as medical advice. Let's talk about Disaster Preparedness Month, which is September. And we're talking about David Dubine's new book, Climate Revolution. And we've included links to this book in the description here, to oilseedcrops.org. Let's read an excerpt. Yesterday we talked about, in order to prep, develop and improve your home skills. Today, let's talk about strengthening your personal relationships. Network with your neighbors. Make a nextdoor.com account and network your whole neighborhood together, as we did here. There's a million different things you can do to figure out who's going to do what in the event of an emergency. Will you have to evacuate if the power grid goes down for a week where you're located? Or will you be able to hunker down and hold out? Know who has structured their life in such a way that they can be an asset as opposed to a liability in the event of a disaster. If you're wondering who the cavalry is, it's probably because the cavalry is you. De oppresso liber. Let's go back to space, as in the space weather. Solar wind density 2.54 protons per cubic centimeter. Solar wind speed 340 kilometers per second as solar minimum conditions persist. KP is at 1 for most of the past 24 hours and currently back to 1. Next, we'll look at magnetosphere movies. We'll look at the velocity and the density and the pressure. And this data archiving section brought to you at massive personal expense and risk. So there's the velocity data. Here's the density. If you're wondering what's in my coffee, it's organic, very dark French roast, as well as some cocoa, some cayenne pepper, and some coconut oil, believe it or not. Anyway, there's the density. We do see a small magnetic spike here around 440 UT. Nothing to write home about. And lastly, here's the pressure. 4 hours of data there. Courtesy University of Michigan geospace model. Nothing to write home about there. Everything looks like solar minimum conditions. Don't let this section bore you, folks, as there's plenty of extra stuff to cover. And again, we're making 2 videos today because there's a ton of things to cover in the censored versus sinkhole section. Let's look at the ground geospace magnetic perturbations. You're going to see this little global spike here, a current spike, right around 440. I don't know why that is not showing up. $5.40, my mistake. All right, there you go. And we archive this data every day on this channel because we can't access the data. So you know you could let your computer screen rip this all day and get all the data, but otherwise it can't be accessed. Here's the ionosphere, last 6 hours. And it's looking pretty wobbly, as it usually does around the South Atlantic anomaly, located underneath my pointer here. Otherwise, nothing too special. Not quite as charged on the sun side as it was yesterday at this time. And there's the latest image. 715 UT. X-ray flux is still flatlined. We haven't even seen a B-class flare since July 7th. There's the GOES electron flux looking pretty smoothed out here. Not expecting many GPS errors around the world. And relativistic electrons have chilled out too. There's the graph for that, courtesy solon.info. Charging hazards are non-existent. And here's where stuff is in the solar system. Milky Way galaxy team for the win. And there's where stuff will be in 1 week, approaching a new moon. There's the GOES magnetometer data. And we are looking to see some significant spikes in this coming up as we're approaching the other side of the current sheet. Why did the planet cross the heliospheric current sheet? To get to the other polarity. Now you can see our field lines here on planet Earth are about probably less than 1 day from this crossover point, headed to the other side of the current sheet, charged up by the north Z field of the sun, depicted here in green. Keep in mind this data is 1 hour and 43 minutes old. Magnetic phenomena can change with absolutely no warning. And again, there is an active region there, some cycle 25 activity. We'll be looking at it all day to see if that turns into a sunspot or not. Here's where stuff is above my head. If you would like to figure out where stuff is above yours, go to in-the-sky.org and put in your information, your location, and press play if you'd like an animation of when Deneb will be hitting the horizon at your ground station, right around when Mars and Venus and the Sun all rise simultaneously, as the cosmic pileup continues on a daily basis. Now, we saw some big, deep earthquakes. Let's look at the last 24 hours here. All right, so technical difficulties averted there. So, here's some deep, big quakes. Now, we covered them yesterday. We're going to cover them again today because we're doing this ultra early. So, it was, again, a 6.0 at Indonesia, which this happened while we did yesterday's video. 591 kilometer depth. And also a 5.7 right in the same place at 638 kilometers depth. Earthquake risk is not complete as a result of those quakes. I mean, the earthquake risk continues, folks. Check it out. Here's a 4.5 at depth of Chile. Here's a 4.8 at Indonesia. That one is at 522 kilometers depth. Here's one south of Fiji. 4.5 magnitude, 529 kilometers depth. Here's a Tongan quake, 5.1, a 4.5 at Indonesia after that. That one about an hour and a half later. Here's a 5.0 at Indonesia. So a big uptick in Oceania quakes there, especially deep quakes. 4.5 in China. Here's a 5.0 at Papua New Guinea. That one is at depth. Again, heads up Oceania. Here's a 4.8 at New Zealand, northeast of New Zealand in that ocean rift zone. And just a couple of hours ago here, since we made the video, a 5.4 hits Tonga. So big uptick in quakes, folks, deep quakes, etc. If you're in a location where earthquakes are common, please have a plan for a disaster. As again, it's disaster prepping month. Volcano rundown, we got Shivaluch back on the list, located on the Kamchatka Peninsula, exploding and producing a 20,000 foot ash plume. Mount Dakono, also exploding, 7,000 foot ash plume there. Popocatépetl, go ahead, say it aloud, folks. Popocatépetl, located near Mexico City, exploding, producing a 23,000 foot ash plume. Revenador in Ecuador exploding, 19,000 foot ash plume there. Sabancaya exploding, 25,000 foot plume there. And Nevados de Chilean, intermittent weak emissions of WV, which is not West Virginia, and possible volcanic ash. Seriously, what does that mean, WV? I can't figure it out. Let's move on to windy.com's pressure maps as we look at McMurdo Station. Please leave a comment if you'd like to visit McMurdo Station, as I would so jump on the opportunity to go to Antarctica. And I'm great at shoveling snow, so it could be a thing. I don't know about wintering in Antarctica. Not so sure about that, folks. Please leave a comment if you'd like to winter at Vostok Station. Anyway, let's animate the pressure map. Shout out to David Dubine. Your earthquake risk is going up. You've got a low pressure anomalously going north and west. And here's where pressure zones will be in about 24 hours from the making of this video. And how about a little U.S. Doppler radar for our United States mainland lower 48 viewers? There's a scenario on the Doppler radar, courtesy AccuWeather.com. And there's a lightning situation right now. Some pretty heavy lightning there over southern Saskatchewan. Pretty heavy storm there. Check out lightningmaps.org the next time you hear thunder. You'll be amazed. Next, we're on nullschool.net here looking at the eastern jet streams. There is a scenario in the eastern world. And there's a scenario in the western world. More extreme meridional jet stream flow. And we're just going to leave it there and keep going, as there's plenty of stuff to cover. Here's the cloud layer over the U.S. We're looking at the NASA GOES interactive weather satellite, the shortwave satellite animation. And we're going to zoom in on southern Saskatchewan. And there's that zone. Looks like we've got some rapid cloud nucleation going on there. Pretty serious convergence zone. Let's look at the water vapor. And there's the water vapor image. Again, sudden cloud nucleation, folks. And let's look at the zoomed out view of the water vapor before we continue on with more stuff. Some pretty violent weather going on there in the North Atlantic. There's a powerful low being covered up by a bunch of dry air there. Massively conducting area. And yeah, another extreme convergence over Texas. Let's zoom in on that too. And we got a perfect example of electrical pulse waves coming out of this zone here. You can see these waves just emanating through. They look like shock waves. And that is conduction in that dry air, folks. Keep in mind, dry air is more massive than wet air and has a tendency to push around the wet air. And we see various spots of rapid cloud nucleation. Here's another spot here in eastern Texas. Hope everybody's doing okay down there in Texas. Please leave a comment if you had to visit your house on a rowboat due to all the flooding. I guess they got, 6 inches an hour at some point. It was reported. Hopefully things are cleaning up well. Shout out Texans! The Germans say everything is bigger in Germany. The Texans say everything is bigger in Texas, yeah? Again, folks, another video coming out. Censored versus sinkhole. But first, a bonus feature on this video. Looking at the colorized magnetogram here. Again, this is 7 hours of solar activity. We do see that area right there. Zoom in on that. That area right there, that is cycle 25 activity all the way due to the polarity. You can see the date stamps. You can see the time stamps. And thanks for seeing the video, everybody. Remember, when you're staring at the sun, don't drink. And if you drink, stare at the sun anyway. Attempt to understand the physics and don't drive. And since it'll never be now again, may the solar wind be at your back and the atherosclerosis absent. From your veins.